Kyle Morrison wiped the grease from his hands and checked the time on his datapad. Almost midnight on mining station, Frontier 7. Which meant the equipment bay was quiet, except for the steady hum of air processors. He preferred working these late hours when nobody bothered him with questions or small talk. He was replacing a power coupling on a mining drone when he heard the door slide open behind him. Kyle didn't turn around immediately. People usually left him alone during night shifts, which was exactly how he liked it. "I need help." The voice was soft and carried a strange musical quality that human vocal cords couldn't produce. Kyle turned and saw Vela standing near the entrance. She was Quillari, one of the few aliens who worked in the human sector of the station. Her people stood about human height but were slimmer, with skin that shifted between pale blue and silver depending on the light. Her large eyes were luminous in the dim bay, reflecting the overhead lights like polished gems. But what caught Kyle's attention immediately was the damage to her environmental suit. The left side showed scorch marks and several deep cracks in the protective plating. A thin mist leaked from one of the seals, which meant her life support was failing. What happened? Kyle was already moving toward his tool rack, grabbing what he needed. "Drilling accident in Sector 12. Vela's voice trembled slightly. The rock face collapsed. "I got out, but my suit took damage." Kyle gestured to the workbench. "Sit there. Don't move around too much. You're losing atmosphere." Vela climbed onto the bench carefully. She was shaking now, and Kyle knew it wasn't just fear. Quillari needed specific atmospheric conditions that human environments couldn't provide. The cold was already affecting her. He worked quickly, running diagnostic scans on the damaged suit. The readings made him frown. The crystalline matrix that powered Quillari technology was fractured in 3 places. Their tech was advanced, far beyond human engineering in most ways, but it was also delicate. One wrong move, and the whole system could collapse. "How bad is it?" Vela asked. "Bad enough." Kyle pulled open a storage locker and started pulling out components. "Your people use crystalline tech. We use metal and circuits. I'm going to have to make a hybrid system to get you stable. Number 4, I'm self-to-thater. Can you do that? We're about to find out." Kyle had been working with Vela for 6 months now. She had specifically requested assignment to the human sector, which was unusual. Most aliens kept their distance from humans. The Galactic Union had only accepted Earth into their community 5 years ago, and many species still considered humans too unpredictable and dangerous. But Vela was different. She was curious about human methods and asked endless questions about Earth technology. Kyle had been teaching her how human engineering worked, even though their supervisors thought it was a waste of time. Quillari didn't need to understand primitive human tools. He opened the damaged suit panel and carefully examined the crystalline matrix inside. The fractures were worse than he thought. Touching it wrong could shatter the entire structure. "This is going to take a while," Kyle said. "Talk to me. Keep your mind off the cold." "What should I talk about?" "Anything. Tell me about your homeworld." Vela started describing the desert plains of Quellar, the crystal formations that grew from the ground like trees, the 3 moons that lit the night sky. Her voice steadied as she talked, which was what Kyle wanted. He needed her calm while he worked. His hands moved with practiced precision, removing the damaged crystalline components and replacing them with human-made circuits. It was delicate work, bridging 2 completely different technologies. One mistake could kill her. "Why did you come to this station?" Vela asked suddenly. "Earth has many places humans can work. Why come so far from home?" Kyle didn't look up from his work. "Needed a change." "That's not a real answer. It's the only one I'm giving." Vela was quiet for a moment. "My family didn't want me to work with humans. They said your people are too emotional, too unstable. They said I would get hurt." Maybe they were right. They were wrong. Vela's voice was firm despite her shaking. "You're not unstable. You're focused. Careful. Every time I watch you work, I see someone who cares about doing things right." Kyle paused, glancing up at her. Vela was watching him with those large, luminous eyes. Her people could sense emotions through bioelectric fields, something humans didn't have. Or if they did, it was too faint for anyone to notice. He wondered what she sensed from him now. "Hold still," he said, returning to the repair. "This next part is tricky." He carefully rerouted the power flow through the hybrid system he was building. The crystalline tech fought against the human components at first, but slowly the two systems began working together. The life support readings on his scanner started climbing back to safe levels. Vela's shaking gradually stopped. Color returned to her skin, the blue tones becoming more vibrant. She let out a long breath. "Better?" Kyle asked. "Much better, thank you." He continued working, making fine adjustments and reinforcing the connections. The repair would hold for weeks if she was careful, long enough to order proper replacement parts from Quellar. "You saved my life," Vela said quietly. "Just doing my job." "No. This is beyond your job. You could have called a Quellari technician. Instead, you fixed my suit yourself using technology you weren't trained for." Kyle closed the access panel and ran a final diagnostic. Everything showed green. "All set. Try to avoid any more cave-ins for a while." Vela slid off the workbench and stood facing him. She reached out and touched his arm, her long fingers resting lightly on his sleeve. It was a significant gesture for her people. Kyle had learned Quellari were sensitive to touch, experiencing the world through bioelectric contact. He felt a slight tingling where she touched him, like a gentle electric current running across his skin. Her biofield, he realized. She was sharing something with him through that touch, though he couldn't read it the way another Quellari could. "Thank you, Kyle," she said. "You're welcome." She held his gaze for a long moment, then turned and walked toward the door. But she paused at the threshold, looking back at him with an expression he couldn't quite interpret. There was something in her luminous eyes, something that made his chest tighten. Then she was gone, the door sliding shut behind her. Kyle stood alone in the equipment bay, staring at the closed door. His arm still tingled where she had touched him. He shook his head and returned to the mining drone he had been working on before the interruption. But he couldn't focus. His mind kept replaying the last hour. The careful way Vela had watched him work. The sound of her voice when she defended humans against her family's prejudices. The touch of her hand on his arm. He had come to this remote station to be alone, to escape from connections and complications. But somehow, over the past 6 months, Vela had become part of his daily routine. He looked forward to her visits to the equipment bay, her questions about human engineering, the way she explained Quellari technology with patience when he didn't understand. Kyle put down his tools and rubbed his face. This was exactly what he had been trying to avoid. Getting involved. Caring about someone. Opening himself up to the possibility of pain, but standing in the empty bay, with the memory of her touch still tingling on his skin, Kyle realized it might already be too late. The days following the repair fell into a new pattern. Though Kyle tried to pretend he didn't notice, Vela started visiting the equipment bay more frequently. Sometimes she brought samples of Quellari technology, asking Kyle to examine how it worked. Other times she claimed her tools needed calibration, or her equipment had developed strange malfunctions. Kyle knew most of these problems were either minor or didn't exist at all, but he never said anything. He just fixed whatever she brought him and listened to her talk. 2 weeks after the accident, Vela arrived during his lunch break, carrying a datapad displaying schematics for Quellari atmospheric processors. She claimed she wanted to understand how humans adapted them for use in mixed-species stations. Kyle moved aside the sandwich he had been eating and examined the schematics. "These are standard designs. Nothing special about the human adaptations. But you made modifications in Sector 7 last month. I saw the report. You increased efficiency by 12%. That was just basic optimization. Any decent engineer could have done it. None of the Quellari engineers thought to do it." Kyle shrugged. "Different approaches. Your people build elegant systems that work perfectly. Humans build messy systems that adapt to problems." Vela sat on the edge of his workbench, her legs dangling. "Tell me about Earth. What's it like?" "You've seen pictures. Pictures don't tell me what it feels like. Do you miss it?" Kyle leaned back in his chair. He had been on Frontier 7 for 3 years, sending most of his earnings back to his sister and her kids. He had volunteered for the longest contract available, choosing isolation and distance deliberately. Sometimes, he admitted, I miss the ocean. Earth has these massive bodies of water that cover most of the planet. The sound of waves hitting the shore, the smell of salt air. You can't get that anywhere else. Vela's eyes widened. I've read about Earth's oceans. Quellar has no large water bodies, just underground reservoirs and small lakes. What does an ocean look like? Imagine water stretching to the horizon in every direction. So much water you can't see the other side. Waves that move like living things. Sometimes calm and flat like glass, sometimes wild with storms that can sink ships. It sounds dangerous. It is, but it's also beautiful. Vela was quiet for a moment, and Kyle noticed she was watching him with that intense focus her people had. He wondered what her bioelectric senses were picking up from him, whether she could feel the mixture of nostalgia and regret that thinking about Earth always brought. Why did you leave? She asked softly. Kyle stood up and walked to his tool rack, organizing wrenches that didn't need organizing. Needed a change. Already told you that. That's still not a real answer. It's the answer I'm giving. The conversation shifted to safer topics, and eventually Vela left. But Kyle noticed she had forgotten her datapad on his workbench. He picked it up, intending to return it, then set it back down. She would have to come back for it tomorrow. The thought made him smile before he caught himself. 3 days later, Kyle and Vela were assigned together to repair an external sensor array. The array monitored asteroid movements around the station, and one of its primary units had stopped responding. They suited up in the airlock, double-checking each other's seals. Spacewalks were dangerous, especially for Quillari. Vela's species hadn't evolved for zero-gravity environments, and their slimmer builds made the bulky spacesuits awkward. You didn't have to volunteer for this, Kyle said as they prepared to exit. I could have taken someone else. I want to learn how external repairs work. Besides, my bioelectric senses might help diagnose the problem. Or, you just wanted an excuse to spend 4 hours with me. Vela's suit prevented him from seeing her face clearly, but he heard the smile in her voice. That too. They exited the airlock and used safety tethers to move along the station's hull toward the damaged array. The asteroid field glittered around them, chunks of rock tumbling slowly through space. Beyond that, stars stretched in every direction. Kyle had done dozens of spacewalks, but the view never got old. The sheer scale of space, the reminder of how small humans were in the universe. It was humbling. They reached the sensor array and Kyle began running diagnostics while Vela held the equipment. She was quiet, and he glanced over to see her staring out at the stars. First spacewalk? He asked. Third. But I don't think I'll ever get used to it. All that emptiness. How do humans deal with being so far from Earth? Doesn't it make you feel lost? Sometimes. But that's kind of the point. What do you mean? Kyle focused on the sensor panel, running tests on the communication relays. Sometimes people need to be lost for a while. Need to be somewhere that nobody knows them. Nobody has expectations. Somewhere they can figure things out. What are you trying to figure out? Before Kyle could answer, his scanner started beeping urgently. Micrometeor shower. Incoming. From Sector 9. How bad? Bad enough. We need to take shelter. The maintenance pod is 50 meters starboard. They moved quickly but carefully along the hull, following the safety rails. Kyle could see the first impacts hitting the station's shields. Tiny flashes of light as particles burned up on contact. Most were harmless, but a shower this dense could include larger chunks. They reached the maintenance pod and cycled through its small airlock. The interior was cramped, barely large enough for 2 people in spacesuits. Kyle sealed the hatch and checked his scanner. We'll be here for at least an hour. Maybe 2. The shower is denser than initial readings suggested. In speaking his way, Vela settled into the small space as best she could. I've had worse accommodations. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the occasional ping of particles hitting the pod's exterior. Kyle monitored the scanner, tracking the shower's progress. Slowly, the tension in his shoulders began to ease. "Can I ask you something?" Vela's voice was quiet in the confined space. "Sure. Do humans have something like bioelectric fields? Something that lets them sense emotions in others?" "Not really. We pick up on body language, tone of voice, facial expressions, but it's all guesswork. We can't actually feel what another person is feeling. That must be lonely." Kyle had never thought about it that way. "I guess we're used to it. We learn to trust words instead of senses. But words can lie. So can everything else." Vela was quiet for a moment. "I can't read you clearly, Kyle. Your biofield is so faint compared to Quellari. It frustrates me sometimes. I want to understand what you're thinking, what you're feeling, but I can only guess. Welcome to being human. We're all just guessing all the time. Is that why you came here? To a place where nobody can read you?" Kyle looked at her, though her face was mostly hidden by the suit's helmet. "Maybe. 3 years ago, someone I cared about told me I was too closed off, too hard to reach, said I kept everyone at a distance. I thought coming here would prove her wrong, but instead it proved her right. Turns out I'm good at being alone. You're not alone now." "No, I'm not." They talked for another hour, their conversation ranging from serious topics to absurd ones. Vela described her family back on Quellar, her younger siblings who thought her choice to work with humans was insane. Kyle talked about his sister and her 2 kids, how he sent money home so they could have better lives than he had growing up. Eventually, Vela's voice grew softer, the words coming slower. Kyle realized she was getting tired. The spacewalk had taken more energy from her than she wanted to admit. "Rest if you need to," he said. "I'll monitor the scanner. I'm fine." But 5 minutes later, her helmet tilted slightly to the side, moving closer to where Kyle sat. Not quite touching, but near enough that he could see the faint glow of her bioelectric field through his suit's sensors. Kyle didn't move. He barely breathed. Something about this moment felt important, like standing at the edge of a cliff and looking down. One step forward meant jumping. One step back meant safety. He watched the scanner display, tracking the slowly diminishing meteor shower, while Vela dozed beside him. Her presence filled the small space, impossible to ignore. Kyle Morrison had spent 3 years running from connection. From the risk of caring about someone, he had chosen the most isolated job he could find, working night shifts when possible, keeping conversations short and impersonal. But sitting in that tiny maintenance pod, watching over a sleeping Quellari who had asked him about love and loneliness, Kyle realized he was in trouble. The kind of trouble that made his chest tight and his thoughts chaotic. The kind of trouble he had come light years to avoid. When the meteor shower finally cleared and they could return to the station, Vela woke slowly. She didn't mention falling asleep near him, and Kyle didn't bring it up. But as they made their way back along the hull to complete the sensor repair, Kyle caught her glancing at him through her helmet's viewport. And he knew, with absolute certainty, that everything between them had changed. A week passed after the spacewalk, and Vela's behavior changed in ways Kyle couldn't quite understand. She still visited the equipment bay, but less frequently. When she did come, she seemed distracted, her usual curiosity muted. She answered Kyle's questions with short responses and avoided meeting his eyes. Something was wrong, but Kyle didn't know how to ask about it without crossing boundaries he wasn't sure existed. He assumed her supervisor had warned her about spending too much time with humans. The Quellari had rules about maintaining cultural separation, about not forming close bonds with species they considered dangerous. Maybe Vela had been told to keep her distance. The thought bothered Kyle more than it should have. On the 8th night after the spacewalk, Kyle was running diagnostics on a cargo hauler's engine when Vela appeared in the equipment bay doorway. It was late, well past the end of her shift. She stood there for a long moment, as if deciding whether to enter. "Need something?" Kyle asked, trying to keep his voice casual. Vela stepped inside, and Kyle noticed she was carrying her personal gear. Not station equipment this time, but her own environmental suit and toolkit. My backup systems need recalibration, she said. The readings are off. Kyle set down his scanner and gestured to the main workbench. Let me take a look. Vela placed her suit on the bench, and Kyle began examining it. The backup systems seemed fine at first glance, but he ran deep diagnostics anyway. The work would take several hours, careful, detailed work that required complete focus. The equipment bay was quiet except for the soft hum of machinery and the occasional beep from Kyle's diagnostic tools. Vela sat on a stool near the bench, watching him work. The silence felt heavy, loaded with things neither of them was saying. Your sister sent you another message today, Vela said suddenly. I saw you checking your datapad during lunch. Kyle kept his eyes on the suit components. Yeah. Her oldest kid started school this year. She sent pictures. Do you miss them? Every day. But the money I send home helps. That matters more than me being there. Does it? Matter more, I mean. Kyle paused in his work, glancing at her. What else would I be doing on Earth? Working some factory job for half the pay? At least here I'm useful. Here I can make a difference in their lives. You're useful here in other ways too. Like fixing your suit for the 3rd time this month? Like teaching me. Like showing me that humans aren't what my people think they are. Kyle returned his attention to the suit. And what do your people think we are? Dangerous. Emotionally unstable. Too quick to anger. Too slow to forgive. My family believes humans are violent by nature, that you solve problems with force instead of diplomacy. We're not all like that. I know. I've been trying to tell them that for months. But they don't listen. Kyle made a small adjustment to the atmospheric processor, his movements precise. What changed? A week ago, you were coming to the bay almost every day. Now you avoid me except when you need something fixed. Did someone tell you to stay away? Vela was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. No one told me anything. I've been avoiding you because I needed to think. About what? About whether I'm making a mistake. Kyle's hands stilled on the tools. A mistake about what? About you. The words hung in the air between them. Kyle carefully set down the delicate component he had been holding and turned to face her fully. Vela, I don't understand what you're trying to say. She stood up from the stool and moved closer to the workbench. Her luminous eyes caught the overhead lights, making them seem to glow. Kyle could see the slight tremor in her hands, the way her bioelectric field pulsed unevenly. She was nervous. Quillari form bonds through bioelectric resonance, she said. When two of my people are compatible, their fields synchronize. They can feel each other's emotions, share thoughts without words. It's how we know when we've found someone who matters. Kyle nodded slowly. I've read about that. But humans don't have biofields. Not ones that Quillari can read clearly. When I try to sense what you're feeling, I get almost nothing. Just tiny, flickering impressions that disappear before I can understand them. That must be frustrating. It is. But it's also terrifying. Why terrifying? Vela's hands gripped the edge of the workbench. Because I don't know what you feel. I don't know if the things I sense from you are real or just my imagination. I don't know if this connection I feel is mutual or if I'm alone in it. Kyle's chest tightened. He knew where this conversation was going, and part of him wanted to stop it before they crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. But another part of him, the part that had been noticing Vela more and more over the past months, wanted to hear what she would say next. What connection? He asked quietly. The one that makes me think about you when I should be working. The one that makes me volunteer for assignments just so I can spend time with you. The one that made me fall asleep next to you in that maintenance pod because I felt safer with you than I felt anywhere else. Kyle opened his mouth but no words came out. His mind raced, trying to process what she was saying, trying to figure out how to respond. Vela continued, her voice growing stronger despite the tremor. I know it's foolish. I know my people would say I'm imagining things because I want to see them. I know humans probably don't form attachments the same way Quillari do. But I needed you to know. I needed to say it out loud instead of carrying it alone. Vela, let me finish, please. She took a breath. I've been avoiding you because I was afraid. Afraid that if I kept spending time with you, I would fall deeper into this. Afraid that I was already too far gone to protect myself. Afraid that when I finally asked you the question I've been wanting to ask, your answer would break something in me. Kyle felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. What question? Vela moved closer, until only the workbench separated them. Her bioelectric field grew stronger, and Kyle could feel it now like static electricity raising the hair on his arms. She reached across the bench and placed her hand over his. The tingling sensation was immediate and intense. Her voice trembled as she asked, "Do you love me, human?" The question hit Kyle like a physical impact. He stared at her, his mind completely blank. Love. She was asking if he loved her. Not, "Do you care about me?" or "Do you think about me?" but the direct, impossible question that had no easy answer. Kyle had been running from love for 3 years. He had come to this isolated station specifically to avoid forming attachments, to avoid the possibility of being hurt again. He had built walls around himself, and convinced himself he was better off alone. But Vela was asking him to tear down those walls with a single word, and he didn't know if he could do it. Kyle started, then stopped. His throat felt tight. Vela, that's not a simple question. For Quillari it is. Either the fields resonate or they don't. Either the bond exists or it doesn't. But I'm not Quillari. I'm human. We don't have fields to resonate. We don't have a simple way to know if what we feel is real or just temporary attraction. So you do feel something? Kyle pulled his hand away, running it through his hair in frustration. I don't know what I feel. You're asking me to name something I haven't even admitted to myself yet. Then admit it now. It's not that easy. Why not? Because love means risk. It means opening yourself up to someone and trusting they won't destroy you. It means being vulnerable and honest, and all the things I came here to avoid. Vela's expression shifted, hurt flashing across her features. So I'm just another complication you're trying to avoid? No, that's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? Kyle struggled to find words that would explain the chaos in his head. He cared about Vela. He knew that much. He thought about her constantly, looked forward to her visits, found himself making excuses to spend time with her. But was that love? How could he know for certain? Vela, He met her luminous eyes, seeing the hope and fear mixed together in her expression. He wanted to give her the answer she needed. He wanted to be brave enough to take the risk. But the words wouldn't come. The silence stretched between them, growing heavier with each passing second. Vela's bioelectric field dimmed slightly, and Kyle realized she was interpreting his silence as rejection. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I shouldn't have asked. I put you in an unfair position. No, wait. Just give me a moment to... The station alarm cut through the air, a sharp blaring sound that made them both jump. Emergency lights began flashing red along the ceiling. Kyle's datapad started beeping urgently with incoming messages. He grabbed it and read the display, his blood running cold. There's been a collapse in the mining sector. Multiple casualties. They're calling all emergency personnel. Vela was already moving toward the door. We have to help. Kyle followed, their unfinished conversation abandoned as they ran toward the crisis. But even as they rushed through the corridors toward the mining sector, Kyle's mind kept replaying that moment in the equipment bay. Vela had asked him if he loved her, and he had frozen. He had let fear and uncertainty rob him of the courage to answer honestly. Now, they were running toward danger, and Kyle didn't know if he would get another chance to give her the answer she deserved. The answer he was beginning to realize had been yes all along. The mining sector looked like a war zone. Kyle and Vela arrived to find emergency crews already working, but the scene was chaos. A malfunction in one of the automated drilling systems had triggered a chain reaction. 3 tunnel sections had collapsed, trapping 17 workers deep inside the asteroid. The air was thick with rock dust, and alarm klaxons echoed through the corridors. Station Commander Lopez stood at the emergency command post, coordinating rescue efforts. She was a compact woman with gray streaks in her dark hair and the kind of calm intensity that came from decades of frontier experience. Morrison, good. We need your engineering expertise. She pointed to a holographic display showing the collapsed sections. We've got people trapped behind approximately 40 meters of collapsed rock. The automated systems are down, life support is failing, and we're picking up toxic gas leaks from fractured fuel lines. Kyle studied the display. How much time before the gas becomes lethal? 2 hours. Maybe less. What about drilling new access tunnels? Too slow. We'd need 6 hours minimum, and that's if we don't hit more unstable sections. A Quellari supervisor named Torin stepped forward. His bioelectric field pulsed with agitation. We should evacuate the entire sector. Bringing in more rescue teams risks additional casualties. We don't abandon people, Kyle said flatly. Human sentiment won't save lives. We need a methodical approach. Lopez held up a hand. Enough. What are our options? Kyle zoomed in on the display, examining the rock composition and structural supports. An idea was forming, dangerous and desperate, but potentially effective. We use controlled charges to blast through the debris. Strategic placement could create a path to the trapped workers in under an hour. The Quellari supervisor's field flared bright with alarm. Explosive charges in an unstable tunnel system? That's insane. One miscalculation would bring down the entire sector. One miscalculation means 17 people die from gas poisoning instead of cave-ins. Either way, they're dead if we don't act fast. Vela, who had been silent until now, spoke up. I can help. My bioelectric senses can map the structural integrity better than scanners. I can guide the charge placement. Absolutely not, Torin said. You're not trained for this kind of operation. Neither is anyone else here. The humans have the explosives expertise, and I have the sensing capability. Together we can make this work. Lopez looked between Kyle and Vela, then at the display showing life support levels dropping in the trapped sections. Time was running out. Do it, she said. But Morrison, if you have even a shadow of doubt, you abort. Understood? Understood. 20 minutes later, Kyle was suited up and entering the collapsed section with a team of 3 other humans and Vela. They carried shaped charges, placement tools, and remote detonators. The tunnel was a nightmare of broken rock and twisted metal supports. Vela moved ahead of the group, her bioelectric field extending outward like invisible fingers, feeling for structural weaknesses. She pointed to specific locations, and Kyle marked them on his scanner. There's a support beam intact behind that debris, she said. If we blast 3 meters to the left, we can use it as an anchor point. Kyle examined the area she indicated. His engineering training told him she was right, though he couldn't sense the structural details the way she could. All right, first charge goes here. He placed the explosive carefully, setting the timer and yield. The team moved deeper into the tunnel, with Vela guiding them around unstable sections that would have been invisible to scanners. Kyle's communication channel kept buzzing with updates from the command post. The trapped workers' life support was dropping faster than predicted. They had 90 minutes left, maybe less. How many more charges? Vela asked. 4. We need to punch through 3 separate walls of debris. They reached the second placement point. This one was trickier. The rock formation was dense and shot through with metal fragments from destroyed equipment. Wait, Vela said, her hand raised. There's something wrong here. I'm sensing a power signature behind this wall. Something active. Kyle scanned the area. Damaged fuel cell. If we blast here, we could trigger an explosion. Can we go around it? Not without adding another hour to the rescue time. They stared at the debris wall. Somewhere beyond it, 17 people were running out of breathable air. Kyle's mind raced through possibilities, calculating angles and blast radiuses. I can shape the charge to direct the force away from the fuel cell, he said slowly. But it has to be perfect. No margin for error. Can you do it? Kyle met her eyes through their helmet visors. We're about to find out. He spent 15 minutes setting up the charge, checking and rechecking every connection. Vela stood beside him, her bioelectric senses monitoring the fuel cell for any change in its power signature. It's stable, she said. But barely. Then let's not waste time. They moved to the 3rd placement point, then the 4th. Each charge had to be precisely positioned, precisely timed. Kyle's hands were steady despite the pressure. Years of training taking over. But in the back of his mind, he couldn't stop thinking about the conversation in the equipment bay. Vela had asked him if he loved her, and he had frozen. He had let fear stop him from being honest. Now they were risking their lives together. And he realized how stupid it was to waste time being afraid of feelings when life was this fragile. "Last charge in position," Kyle said into his communication channel. "Everyone fall back to safe distance." The team retreated to a reinforced section of tunnel. Kyle checked the detonation sequence one final time, his finger hovering over the trigger. Detonating in 3, 2, 1. The tunnel shook with a series of controlled explosions. Rock dust filled the air, and for a terrifying moment Kyle thought he had miscalculated. But as the dust settled, he saw the path they had created. 40 meters of debris cleared in 5 carefully orchestrated blasts. "Path is open," he reported. Moving to extract trapped workers. The rescue went smoothly after that. The trapped miners stumbled out of the collapsed section, coughing and disoriented but alive. Medical teams rushed forward with oxygen and emergency treatment. Kyle did a head count. 17 people, all accounted for, no casualties. He felt the tension drain from his body, replaced by exhaustion. The rescue had taken every ounce of focus he had. Now that it was over, he could barely stand. Vela appeared beside him, pulling off her helmet. Her skin showed the silver-blue tones of extreme fatigue, but she was smiling. "We did it," she said. "You did it. Without your sensing ability, we would have hit that fuel cell. Without your engineering knowledge, I wouldn't have known where to sense. We make a good team." Kyle removed his own helmet, breathing the recycled station air. Around them, rescue workers were helping the survivors and beginning cleanup operations. Commander Lopez was coordinating with medical teams. The crisis was over, but Kyle barely noticed any of it. He was looking at Vela, seeing the way relief and exhaustion mixed in her expression. She had risked her life to help save people she barely knew. She had trusted his judgment completely, even when the Quellari supervisor called his plan insane. Without thinking, Kyle reached for her hand. Vela's fingers intertwined with his immediately, and he felt the familiar tingle of her bioelectric field wrapping around his skin like warm static. They stood there in the destroyed tunnel, covered in dust and exhausted, hands clasped together. No words were spoken, but Kyle felt something pass between them. An understanding, an acknowledgement of what they had just survived together. Vela's bioelectric field pulsed gently, and even though Kyle couldn't read it the way another Quellari could, he felt its meaning. Relief. Gratitude. Something deeper that he didn't have a name for yet. "I need to tell you something," Kyle started to say. But Commander Lopez was calling his name, asking for a status report. Other workers needed attention. The moment slipped away as they were pulled back into the aftermath of the crisis, yet Vela kept holding his hand for one more second before letting go. Her luminous eyes met his, and Kyle saw understanding there. The conversation they had started in the equipment bay wasn't finished, but maybe that was okay. Maybe some questions didn't need immediate answers. Maybe some answers were better shown through actions than spoken through words. As Kyle turned to give his report to Commander Lopez, he glanced back and saw Vela watching him. She touched her hand to her chest, right over her heart, in a gesture that meant something significant to her people. Kyle didn't know exactly what it meant, but he understood its intent, and for the first time since she had asked him that impossible question, he felt like maybe he knew how to answer it after all. The station recovered slowly over the next 3 days. 17 lives had been saved through the coordinated effort of human and alien crews working together. The rescue became a turning point in human-alien relations on Frontier 7. Workers who had previously kept to their own species began mixing more freely in common areas. The cafeteria, once divided into unofficial sections, saw humans and Quellari sitting together. Commander Lopez personally commended Kyle for his quick thinking and Vela for her courage. The story spread through the station, growing with each retelling until it became legend. the human engineer and the Quelari sensor specialist who defied conventional wisdom to save lives. But Kyle and Vela hadn't spoken privately since the rescue. Both of them returned to their work, falling into familiar routines, as if that moment in the equipment bay had never happened. Kyle told himself he was waiting for the right time. Vela seemed to be avoiding him again. Though he caught her watching him occasionally across the cafeteria or in the corridors, neither of them made the first move toward finishing their interrupted conversation. On the fourth morning after the rescue, Kyle received a message from his sister on Earth. He read it during his breakfast break, sitting alone in a corner of the cafeteria. The message was longer than usual. His sister had been offered a promotion at her company, but it meant relocating to a city 3,000 kilometers from the spaceport where Kyle sent his earnings. The opportunity was too good to pass up, but it meant he wouldn't be able to visit when he eventually returned to Earth. The commute would be too expensive. The distance, too great. She was asking for his advice. Should she take the job? Kyle stared at the message for a long time. He had always assumed he would return to Earth someday. 3 years had turned into a vague plan to stay, maybe 5 years total, then go home and reconnect with family. But now he realized he hadn't thought about going home in months. He hadn't thought about Earth much at all. His thoughts kept returning to the equipment bay, to late nights fixing broken equipment, while Vela asked him questions about human culture, to the maintenance pod where she had fallen asleep near him, to the moment in the collapsed tunnel when he had reached for her hand and felt like he had found something he hadn't known he was looking for. Kyle closed the message without responding and went looking for Vela. He found her on the observation deck, standing alone near the wide viewport that showed the asteroid field and stars beyond. She didn't turn when he approached, but he knew she had sensed his presence through her bioelectric field. "I've been avoiding you," Vela said quietly. "I know. I embarrassed myself in the equipment bay. I put you in an impossible position by asking that question." Kyle stood beside her, looking out at the same view. "You didn't embarrass yourself. You were honest. That takes more courage than anything we did during the rescue. But you couldn't answer me." "No, I couldn't." They were quiet for a moment. A small asteroid tumbled past the station, catching the light from distant stars. "I've been thinking about what you said," Kyle continued. "About Quelari and bioelectric resonance. About knowing when you've found someone who matters through sensing their field. Humans don't have that luxury. No, we don't. We have to trust our feelings without any physical confirmation. We have to take risks, without knowing if the other person feels the same way. It's terrifying." Vela finally turned to look at him. "Is that why you came here? To avoid being terrified?" "Yes. 3 years ago, I thought I loved someone. She told me I was too closed off, that I never let anyone really know me. She was right. When she left, I decided it was easier to be alone than to risk that pain again. So you ran." "So I ran," Kyle agreed. "I came to the most isolated place I could find and convinced myself I was better off alone. I sent money to my sister and told myself that was enough. That providing for family from a distance was noble instead of cowardly. But now?" Kyle turned to face her fully. "Now my sister is asking my advice about taking a job that would make it impossible for me to visit when I return to Earth. And I realized I haven't been planning to return. I haven't been thinking about Earth at all." Vela's luminous eyes searched his face. "What have you been thinking about?" "You, constantly. I think about how you laugh when I explain human idioms that don't translate well into Quelari. I think about how you volunteered for that spacewalk even though you were terrified, just because you wanted to learn. I think about how you defended humans to your supervisor, even when it put your own position at risk." Kyle took a breath, trying to organize thoughts that had been chaotic for weeks. "During the rescue, when we were placing those charges and everything depended on perfect coordination between us, I wasn't scared. I should have been terrified, but I trusted you completely. Your judgment, your courage, your determination to save those people. And when it was over and you took my hand, I felt something I haven't felt in 3 years." "What did you feel?" "That maybe being alone isn't actually safer. Maybe the risk of connection is worth it. Maybe running from feelings just means missing out on something important." Vela's bioelectric field brightened slightly, a pulse of hope. Kyle, are you saying, let me finish, please? He moved closer, close enough to feel the faint tingle of her biofield on his skin. You asked me if I loved you, and I froze. I couldn't answer because I was too afraid to admit what I was feeling. But during the rescue, when I thought something might go wrong and we might not make it out, all I could think was that I had wasted our time together, being scared. And now? Kyle realized his heart was racing. This was it. The moment where he either took the risk or retreated back into safety. 3 years of isolation, or the possibility of connection. Fear, or courage. I still don't know if what I feel is love by your definition, or mine, or anyone's definition. I can't sense your bioelectric field the way another Quillari could. I can't tell you that our fields resonate perfectly. But I know that when I'm with you, this station feels less empty. I know that fixing your equipment has become the best part of my day. I know that the thought of you being told to stay away from me makes my chest hurt in a way that has nothing to do with safety protocols. Vela's eyes were bright now, reflecting the starlight from the viewport. That's a long answer to a simple question. It's the only answer I have. I don't know if I love you yet, but I want the chance to find out. I want to stop running from the possibility. I want to see where this goes, even if it's terrifying and complicated and might end badly. What if your people don't accept it? What if mine don't? Then we'll figure it out together. Isn't that what the rescue proved? That humans and Quillari can work together? Even when everyone says it's impossible? Vela was quiet for a long moment. Kyle could see her processing his words, weighing them against her own feelings. He had laid himself bare, admitted his fear, and his hope, and his uncertainty. Now it was her turn to decide if that was enough. Finally, she reached up and touched his face, her fingers gentle against his cheek. The bioelectric tingle was immediate and warm. My people believe that perfect resonance happens instantly, she said softly. That you either feel the connection immediately, or you never will. But maybe that's not the only way bonds form. Maybe some connections build slowly, through shared experiences and trust earned over time. Maybe humans and Quillari just resonate differently. Maybe we do. Vela's hand remained on his face, her biofield pulsing with something Kyle couldn't name but felt deeply. During the rescue, when you were setting those charges, and I was guiding you, I felt something from you. Not a biofield, but something else. A steadiness, a determination, a warmth that wasn't electric but was still real to me. What did it feel like? Like safety, like trust, like maybe bioelectric resonance isn't the only way to know that someone matters. Kyle placed his hand over hers, feeling the way her biofield wrapped around both of them like an embrace. So, where does that leave us? I don't know, but I want to find out. She smiled, and it transformed her face. My family will struggle with this. Your people might too. It won't be easy. Nothing worth doing is easy. Very human philosophy. You're welcome to teach me the Quillari version. Vela laughed, the sound musical and bright in the quiet observation deck. The Quillari version involves a lot of meditation and waiting for the universe to align properly. You would hate it, probably. But I'd try if you asked me to. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars turn slowly beyond the viewport. Somewhere, in that vast darkness, was Earth, home to a sister who needed advice about a job. Somewhere in a different direction was Quellar, home to a family who would struggle to understand their daughter's choices. But here, on this isolated mining station at the edge of known space, Kyle and Vela had found something neither of them had expected. Not perfect resonance or instant certainty, but something more human and more real. The willingness to try, the courage to be vulnerable, the hope that connection might be worth the risk of pain. I'm going to tell my sister to take that job, Kyle said. And I'm going to request an extension on my contract here. How long of an extension? Long enough to see where this goes. Long enough to learn how humans and Quillari can build something together. Vela moved closer, until they were standing side by side, both looking out at the stars. Her biofield surrounded him like warmth, and Kyle realized he could feel it more clearly now. Not reading emotions the way Quillari did, but sensing presence and comfort and acceptance. "You never actually answered my question," Vela said, her voice soft. Kyle turned to look at her, seeing the hope and uncertainty mixed in her luminous eyes. She was still vulnerable, still risking rejection, still waiting for the words that would make everything clear. He thought about all the things he could say. Complicated explanations about human emotions and the difference between love and attraction and the way feelings developed over time. Philosophical discussions about what love meant and whether it could exist between species. But none of that mattered as much as the simple truth. "Not yet," Kyle said honestly, "but I think I'm getting there. Ask me again in a few months." Vela's biofield pulsed bright with joy. "I can work with that." She rested her head against his shoulder, a gesture that bridged human and Quillari customs. Kyle felt the steady pulse of her bioelectric field like a heartbeat. Warm and alive and present. The answer to her question hadn't been simple or immediate. It hadn't been certain or perfect or exactly what either of them expected, but it was honest, and it was hopeful, and it was the beginning of something that might become the very thing she had asked about. Because love, Kyle was learning, wasn't about instant certainty or perfect resonance. It was about choosing to stay when running was easier. It was about being vulnerable when safety was more comfortable. It was about finding someone worth the risk and deciding to take that risk anyway. He had come to Frontier 7 to be alone, to avoid connection, to prove he was better off isolated. But standing on the observation deck with Vela, watching stars that had burned for billions of years, Kyle realized he had been wrong. Humans weren't meant to be alone, neither were Quillari. Maybe no species was. And if finding that connection required bridging the gap between human uncertainty and Quillari biofields, between Earth's oceans and Quillar's desert plains, between running from fear and choosing courage, then Kyle was ready to try. The answer to Vela's question would come eventually, in its own time. But the answer to everything that came after had already begun. In shared glances, and repaired equipment and hands clasped together in collapsed tunnels, and quiet moments on observation decks. It began with two people from different worlds deciding that maybe, just maybe, the universe was big enough for something new.